Hey guys, welcome to the I Hope They Hear This podcast. We have kind of a new setup today. And man, I don't know. This is the first in-person interview I've done since almost a year ago. I think the last one I did was sometime in February of last year. But
Wow.
yeah, thankfully we have, today on today's podcast, we have returning guest Brian and Kim. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, Brian is my brother-in-law. So he is Shirley's older brother. And because we are in our bubble together, we were able to do this in person. And I'm so excited because I mentioned a few times on the podcast about how I bought all this new equipment literally like the week before quarantine happened. So I had all this and I wasn't able to use it for the longest time. But so glad that you're here to be able to partake and use this equipment with me.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor, a privilege, and I can't wait till this is over. So, for your future guests, this setup is amazing.
Yeah?
I mean, yeah, it's really clean. It feels like legitimate, like I'm in a studio. So cool.
Thank you. Well, we have Brian back on today. And for those of you who don't remember, you are on an episode where we talked about finance. And I got some pretty good feedback on that. People coming up to me and saying, hey, I started thinking about like future savings, like not just blowing money. So thank you for that. And it had a good impact. But I've been doing more like people stories recently. And I wanted to kind of get your story because since we've had you on the podcast, there have been a lot of life events happening for you. Your wife is pregnant. Little baby Audrey is going to be coming in. Was it June?
May.
May.
Yes, early May, late April. We'll see. I feel like the last stretch of April is going to go by so slow.
It's going to be so fast. It's going to be fast because you're going to be on such high alert. Yeah.
Oh man.
It's in the moment it feels slow, but then it's like this. Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
But not only that, but even in your career, you've been like moving up in your company. You're COO. For those of you who don't know, that's Chief Operating Officer, which is pretty much the only person higher than you in terms of hierarchy as a CEO, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for someone who's as young as you, it's not a common thing to be that high up. So, I mean, not that that's the focus of today's podcast, but I just wanted to capture your story today. Kind of how your family came to America, how you grew up. I'm sure I know a lot of it, but I don't think I've ever heard it directly from you. It's mostly been from your sister. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's wow, what an introduction. Well, I guess I'll just get right into it. Let's see. So Shirley and I, which is David's wife, we were born in Flushing, Queens, New York. And I don't really recall much other than Italian ices and pizza slices.
Huh.
So Italian ices are like, those little cups, like Rita's over at Swanee Town Center, if anyone happens to go by there during this time. But that's about it. And then we had moved down to Atlanta for the Olympics.
Was it 94, 96?
96.
Okay.
Yes. Honestly, like New York was such a blur for me because you're supposed to have some memories from them, but really all I remember is Italian ices and pizza slices. And then I recall Georgia really well because my dad had taken me to a Korean handball event for the Olympics.
Cool.
And it was, I just remember like holding his hand, having a jacket, and I had like the pins, the 96 Olympic pins and all this stuff. And I just remember seeing all these people, like, different races and stuff. It was so cool. And I think that's actually where my love of sports began. Like my dad, he's a character in that, like, he's very like, just typical traditional Korean guy when he's just in his day-to-day, but when he has a few drinks, he gets really animated. But like, I think that was the first time where sports is the only place where I see my dad, his human, his regular character come out. He's very animated, very loud, gets very excited and passionate. And so we went to that event. And I guess after that, I recall now just like going to school. And this is kind of where just, with the Olympics happening, us in a new place, I understood that much. And
Wait, so you actually went to like an Olympics event?
yeah,
That is so cool.
yes.
Oh, wow. Do you know how your dad even got tickets? Like, that doesn't sound like.
To be honest, I have no idea because growing up, I had begged my dad to take me to like NBA games.
Uh-huh.
And believe it or not, so our grandma, my dad's mom, loved like World Wrestling Federation.
Interesting.
So, a funny story. So like Shirley and I would watch it with my grandma growing up, and this is like when we first learned about good versus evil, right? So like they're such good storytellers.
Yeah.
And I just remember like we were begging because I was wanting to go to some event, and believe it or not, like my dad took me to the Olympics, which is pretty crazy now that I'm really thinking about it. And then he took us to a wrestling event at the Georgia Dome. Our grandma went, and Shirley and I went. I clearly remember because there's this wrestler named Diamond Dallas Page, and he had this thing called, he would do this. I just remember Shirley and I wearing like little like furry gloves, and we'd look at each other doing this. And I got really excited, and I was trying to like go down the steps to get closer. And then I remember I tripped, and I like tripped, and then I landed on one of the chairs as a kid. And like that was the first time I experienced getting the wind knocked out of me. Like I thought, I remember telling my parents, I was like, I think I'm gonna die. Like, what is this feeling? But yeah, I have like really weird memories associated to this. But yeah.
And for those of you who guys, like, because the fact that your grandma likes wrestling, it's such a interesting factoid because I've met her. Like in Korea, we stayed at her house a few days, but she's like the sweetest, like tiny, like nicest, sweetest old lady, and I can't imagine her watching wrestling.
Yeah, like it was the one thing actually that her and I had in common, and believe it or not, like looking at the success of like WWE now, and like all of those, wrestlers have like their professional athletes to have reality shows, but like I just kind of got to watch like Hulk Hogan and like The Rock and like just that I think they called it the Attitude Era or something like that. But it's like it is really random, but at the same time it's like I think that's when I started realizing like and learning too, like little by little, like, oh, like there's good versus evil, right? People will backstab each other. Like you kind of realize like, or at least that's for me when I started to interpret like human nature. And so it's really funny too, because my grandma would wake up at like 5-6 a.m. to pray. And then like on the dot Mondays, Thursdays, 8 p.m. Brian, like, let's watch wrestling. So yeah, it was really interesting.
So that's kind of where your love of sports stemmed from, would you say?
I would say so. Like, so we had the Olympics, we had wrestling, and then my dad actually used to love the Knicks, New York Knicks. And this is like when Jordan, right? So like from 96 to like 98, 99 is like he's having a second three-peat, if you will. So like that's when I started watching basketball with him. And I would make like a $1 bet with my dad. He would always bet for the Knicks. I was always bet for Michael Jordan, obviously. So like it was the first time when I realized like, oh, like there is like certain people that are just really good at something. So then like that's why I have such an affinity for like Michael Jordan, just because like I think it was like the first time where I realized like, wow, like there's just a lot of excitement. And actually, thank you for asking, because I'm like, it's kind of hitting me. I didn't realize like how much I had in common with my dad growing up until right now. Which is crazy to think about. Wow. And then in that same time period, I know you love Batman as well, but that's kind of where my love of Batman started because it was the first toy that I asked for and I got.
Oh.
Um, it was like it was a silver suit with a navy blue, but like it wasn't like the gray one. It was like a metallic silver.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost like a space Batman, or I don't know what it was exactly at the
Yeah.
time, but so I think that's the reason why I love Batman and basketball, and
Huh.
I guess kind of that's the roots of or the foundation of my interest at the time.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Huh. So that's so interesting that until we're asked a question, there are things that we know but really don't connect
Yeah.
that quickly. And I'm just gonna throw this out there. So I talk about like therapy and like counseling a lot on the podcast, and I actually started seeing a counselor. And that's one of the things I'm realizing, like when I talk with her, it's she'll ask these questions, and then when she first throws a question out, I don't really know the answer. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to think on that a little bit. But then she'll ask kind of follow-on questions, and as I'm formulating the answers to those questions, my mind creates these connections, like connecting facts I already know, right? But then like they start connecting, and I'm like, oh, that's the reason why I'm this way. Like, or
Right.
oh, like this is a characteristic of me that I guess I should have known all along, but I never really connected. And so it's interesting how the human mind works like that, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And David didn't pay me to say this, or I'm not, but like I actually he's you're such a great communicator that like I look forward to speaking with you. And so you're I actually think I wouldn't have been able to make that connection if it wasn't for you. I guess
Oh,
like
wow.
you're the person
Yeah.
that I feel like it's easy for me to make those connections with.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to pay him a little extra. No, okay. So yeah, so that's kind of where your love of sports came. And you
Yes.
mentioned your grandma being with you guys. So did you grow up with your grandma?
Yes. So believe it or not, like Shirley and I were like, I mean, if you get to know us now, we're personality wise, we're polar opposites. But growing up, we were like this. We did everything together. Because at the time, like our parents were working, so our grandma was raising us essentially, and we actually lived in a very diverse neighborhood. So it's in Norcross. I forgot Berkeley Springs.
Okay.
That was the name. So like it was just like I just remember us playing like capture the flag in that neighborhood. It's a long neighborhood with like 5 cul-de-sacs, and like I mean there was like us, other Korean kids, like we had a Japanese guy and Spanish, like Mexican, Egyptian.
Whoa.
Obviously just it was a melting pot, and it was so fun because literally, I mean, thinking about it now, it's like it gives me like goosebumps too. But we had 30 kids play capture the flag in one neighborhood.
Oh wow.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like how do you even get that organized?
Yeah. How did you guys get so organized?
I have no idea, but like I will say maybe that's kind of where I think I started learning how to communicate, and I think maybe that's kind of where I might have learned how to bring people together. Obviously, we had like the older generation who would kind of come and join us as a group, but like there are always like pockets of like groups. But then if we all had like capture the flag that we wanted to play, or like laser tag. I don't know if you remember laser tag. Like we would all like beg our parents for it for Christmas, and then get together and just play outside. Like
Was it like the gray one that? Yeah. I remember having that too.
yeah, and it was really interesting because like that was when like we would go outside and Shirley and I would play. We would like run and come home really late, and believe it or not, like Shirley. She has probably the best rhythm of anyone I know. And I know a lot of people with like perfect pitch who's really musically talented. And like, but she has amazing rhythm because like we would growing up, like we would do like little like shows for our parents, and she would she would be the rapper. So like she would take like lullabies and turn it into like a rap. And I would just be in the
Wow.
background making a beat,
Uh-huh.
probably butchering it. But she was like just animated, like the energetic one, because she was the magnet at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, we had a lot of fun together, and that was like when I knew, because like we were like this. So if she would tell me someone would pick on her, obviously I would like go and like, try to fight them growing up, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like Shirley was definitely like I think because we didn't have our parents, we had each other,
Yeah.
and like we navigated through, I think, what every Korean American does, our generation, right? Like our parents can't really speak English, so we have to take care of everything.
Mm.
And so really all we had was each other, and I'm really thankful for that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. It's interesting to hear about kind of the dynamic of Korean American siblings, because even because you and Shirley, you guys are what, 2 years apart?
Mm-hmm.
Like me and my older brother were 2 years apart, but then there's always this dynamic of the older sibling, no matter how close to age, like they end up taking care of the younger one. Because you talk about how protective you were, and Shirley has told me stories of where like if someone was bothering her, she would just run to you and say, "Go get him," So, but then I don't know if that's a shared trait of like all people, or if it's specific to kind of immigrant children, because like you were saying, we don't really have our parents. Sometimes, most of the times, our parents are working, they're busy, and a lot of times they just can't speak the language, so they can't really do a lot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is an interesting point, right? I think it's also because like I don't know if my parents instilled it in me, but there was almost like a, a pride to be Korean, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't wear this hoodie on purpose to kind of do, but like I mean there is an aspect to that, right? Like the Korean pride, like, and obviously growing up in the melting pot that we did, I mean at the time, like racial jokes, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things that would not fly now, like I mean we grew up with that. It was almost like if you couldn't take it, then you were the one that were just too sensitive.
Yeah.
So um I also think for me too, it's like I can be okay with it, but like don't do that to my sister.
Mm.
Cause it's almost like I know they're going after her after I left, especially because um, obviously like they're like, oh, like boys picking on girls
Mm.
and stuff like that. So I don't think I ever told her this, but we're 2 years apart. So like when I start middle school, it's the first time her and I aren't going to school together.
Mm.
And our driveway was one of the bus stops. And I remember because like middle school started after, so I remember waiting with her, and like instead of being so excited to start a new school, I was so worried about her.
Aw.
Um, just making sure like I didn't want anyone to think just because I'm not there, like you know they could say anything like. But I mean, she grew up with me, so she actually knew how to like hold herself up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was proud of her.
Mm.
So proud of her.
So then, because yeah, you and Shirley are 2 years apart, but then 7 years later, or I guess 7 years after Shirley was born, Yuri comes along, right? So did that change the dynamic of like your sibling relationship with Shirley at all, or like kind of how you perceived your role as now not only elder brother to Shirley, but elder brother to Shirley and this new baby?
Yes, it's actually a time period where I've always thought about. I just never really vocalized, like, because as I shared with you, my memories of Shirley growing up, like, we did everything together, like,
Mm.
everything. And then Yuri came, and I just remember us always pushing her on, like, this turquoise, like, stroller. I'm sure there's a lot of pictures of her, like, in it, but I think just after she came, I think that's the first time Shirley and I, like, we weren't the center of our parents' world, but not in a
Mm.
bad way. Like, I think we just understood, like, oh, we have a sibling.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of when things shifted a little bit because my mom had a hard time giving birth and stuff. So like at the time, my mom, just physically wasn't doing well. So, I never really actually asked Shirley about this, but I think that time got a little bit cloudy and 'cause I was just trying to be like a bigger, the older brother to Yudi. But then Shirley, I'm sure she probably went through the most change out of us, from my perspective at least.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a joke because there aren't many photos of Shirley as a child, like smiling. But we found one day and we're like, oh, wow, this is a photo of Shirley smiling. And then she looked at the date and she goes, oh, I know why. And we're like, why? He goes, this was before Yudi was born. So it's like the joke is that all like Shirley's happiness went away once she was no longer the youngest and there was a baby to take care of.
yeah, I actually think that was where, I mean, it's kind of funny we're talking about this because I was actually just messaging my friends about how proud I am of Shirley. But I think with Yudi arriving, Shirley involuntarily kind of had to become an adult. Because thinking back on it, like my mom wasn't doing well physically, and it's not that like my mom didn't want to burden me. I think it was just more of a lack of confidence. Like, oh, like he's not going to be able to help. So I think it was more like, okay, Shirley, what can you do for me? And things like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably when things started to change. Because Shirley, she's always had like this sense of like she needs to fulfill this duty. And I was just always more worried about like how can I have fun and taking care of Yudi. So like it's probably like kind of where we started kind of to drift a little bit in our dynamics. So yeah.
I see. They keep walking me forward. So you guys are Yudi's there. You kind of diverge. You're not. I guess you guys weren't as close as you were before. So like, yeah. How did like what did you kind of do? Like, how was school like?
So I was like, I became really chubby around then, and then I had like lost weight and then got into basketball, and then it was just around that time where like Shirley and I had really separate lives, and then Yudi was getting older, and we got into high school, and just everyone, all the Koreans in Atlanta knew each other either through basketball or church or one way or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was at that time where like our family, like we weren't, we spent a lot of time together, but we weren't as close as we are now. But we were like young. I was very immature. Not that I'm mature now, but very immature, very selfish, entitled, et cetera, et cetera. Shirley was just kind of like to herself. Yudi was like kind of, and I think like the dynamic was a little bit interesting for Shirley and I because as I shared earlier, our parents were working, but they had gotten to a place financially where they could like take some time. So what they couldn't do with us, they did with like Yudi. So then I think just it was like seeing a lot of that, like just kind of made the dynamics very interesting, I should say. I don't really know one word that can summarize that, but it kind of like started setting the paths of kind of the routes we would be taking, I guess, from then all the way up to now, I would say, actually.
Wow.
I would really say that would be the genesis of like kind of the paths we would take that are like converging now, which is interesting.
Because I remember you sharing this when we all went to your parents' house over Thanksgiving. You were sharing about how like you really wanted to like join a basketball team when you were younger in like elementary school, but your parents just couldn't, right? They didn't know the language, like they didn't know how to even start going about doing that. It's not like there was Google back then, like so your parents were just like can't really do anything for you. But then Yudi grew up doing kind of a lot of extracurricular stuff, right? She was really into dance, right? Pretty much up until like sophomore, junior year of high school. Yeah. So and you were kind of telling us how you felt about that, like how did you feel about like seeing those, comparing those two things?
I think I didn't resent anyone. But like didn't resent anyone,
Mm.
and I wasn't necessarily like jealous or envious. It was just more like a like, and maybe it's just it's not just with siblings. It's with like everything where the older generation is like, oh, you got it so good to the next one. But I think for me, it was just more like a lot of the consequences I actually had to experience because of like a lack of language barrier for my parents or things like that. Like I would say my youngest sister, you know, had us
Mm-hmm.
to shield her from. So it was like it was hard in that like we, you know, that was like the first time where I had to go, okay, like how much am I enabling and how much do I need to like not help?
Mm.
But is that not helping coming from a place of true like, hey, I want her to grow, or hey, I'm just like envious or resentful?
Mm.
Probably the latter. So yeah.
No, but the thing that was so beautiful about that conversation was because Yuri was there as well, and she was kind of able to give her side, which was like I always grew up wondering why like I wasn't as close to my siblings as how you and Shirley were like early on. And so
Hmm.
it was like kind of like both of you guys had like your own perspective and own reasons to be like sad or feel like you're missing out on something. But the fact that you guys were able to have that conversation and kind of communicate that to each other so that you guys can kind of understand each other's perspective, like in that moment, at least in Yuri's eyes, I felt like it kind of like was like, oh, like I never knew, like I never
Hmm.
knew that that was the reason. Like I never considered, my older brother and sister like going through these things. I only saw like what I was experiencing. And man, that night was like such a great night of conversation because of that. Like there were so many things that were kind of like brought to the forefront where you guys were able to just talk it out. Not that like I mean, I don't want to give the wrong impression. It wasn't like your relationship is bad or anything like that,
Right,
but
right.
just being able to unearth these things that were like all the way in the past, I thought was so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I I mean, I don't mean to like pivot,
Yeah.
but kind of that conversation, I think like one could happen because it was a running joke when Yudi was younger. Because I'm 9 years older than her, so she
Mm.
was like, "Opa, or she was like, when I turn 21, you'll turn 30. So you're, blah blah blah." And she was just, it was a running joke, but like when we finally had that conversation, it was like, oh, the time that we were joking about to kind of almost never, we didn't want it to happen. It
Mm-hmm.
was the time when we were finally in a stage of our lives where we could communicate. Like, I
Mm.
don't think if we did it any earlier, it would have worked, but I think it was like finally it reached the point where that conversation could be had and we
Yeah.
could be totally empathetic to one another.
Mm.
The timing was like perfect on that. And like, I think just even now, kind of going through it all, it's like I can really, now I'm starting to feel like what God really kind of did for us
Mm.
at the time. Because we grew up in the church, our family, like my mom was like really, she went every Sunday, very involved in things like that. And it was actually the church where I gained my confidence too. Because I was
Mm.
like chubby and I didn't really get along with the kids there.
Uh-huh.
And then I got involved with like praise team. Um, and then with the church tournament and stuff, the basketball
Right.
tournament, like a lot of things kind of fell into place. So like a lot of the intangibles I have now, I learned from really like church.
Mm.
Um, and it's kind of funny because I know Shirley, she was saying like she wasn't confident until like she met, God and Jesus. And now like Yudi, like she grew up in church and she was involved like I was. But, when we went through like our family kind of dispersed,
Yeah.
um, she found God at that period
Mm.
to like kind of hang on. So it's just, well,
Yeah. So walk us through that dispersal because growing up, like I met Shirley when she was just graduating high school.
hmm,
So like I kind of just from an outsider's perspective, it looked like your parents were doing well, like financially, you guys are all stable. So like from the age of like elementary school, middle school, is from what I hear from Shirley, you got and onward, it was pretty comfortable times, right? And then something like drastic happened where, your family literally, like, everyone kind of like spread out, right? So can you kind of explain to us what happened there and like how that kind of affected you?
I actually think my parents, especially my mom, like even my dad, right? Like my dad didn't grow up without a father since he was like 6 or 7.
Mm,
Um, so he didn't really know how to be a dad, but I know he tries his best based on his intentions
mm,
and like it might not be what we want, but we understand like it's what he thinks is right. So the fact that he puts effort into that, we acknowledge, I think.
mm,
But I think like what my parents did a great job about was like instilling the value of family.
mm,
Like family is the only thing and the only group of people that don't need a reason or an excuse. You just help.
mm,
You're there. Um, but we didn't have like the ties that we have now. So like that, but family was the foundation, and then we're doing well. My parents, I don't want to say they made bad decisions. I think it was just more like a perfect storm
mm,
of a lot of things. But what I do really commend them for is like they went for it.
mm,
They took a risk, and my mom opened a yogurt shop. It's not the shop per se that was the problem, because the first one they opened that you helped a lot with actually did well.
yeah.
But I think it was when, and I don't want to like say it was a flaw or fault. I think it was just like when the decisions became more around greed and trying to expand a lot faster. That's when things got a little bit like rocky, I would say.
Because at one point your mom was driving between like 4 different locations trying to manage everything and things like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like and it's crazy to think about, because at that time it made me think like, oh, like we're comfortable, and it's almost like like how could this ever end? Like I never really felt a timeline or almost like an expiration date to our comfort.
Yeah.
But when I started like really realizing what was happening, it was kind of already too late. But like looking back at it now, I think it was good in that, like, I think my dad, if he had kept going down the path he did, I mean, I'm saying it now, but like, I don't know how my sisters feel about it, but I would be really afraid of the man he would have become if it didn't turn out this way.
I see. So you're basically saying some of the things that at the time might have been very negative or perspective wise very negative, you're saying it actually in retrospect kind of put your dad on the path to kind of becoming who he is now. Is that right?
Yes. And that is something I think like $1 trillion could fix. Right? And for me, actually for all of us. So we grew up comfortable. We really have this sense of security that's never ending. And then all that's ripped away from us.
Yeah.
At least, that's how I felt.
Yeah.
And I think like it was confusing and hard, but like, believe it or not, I was really happy that you and Shirley had gotten married and gotten out, because like Shirley was really the rock of the family during that period, right? So like even up until then, when I think about it now, it's like she refused to let the environment dictate what was going to happen with her. It's like, no matter what, I'm going to march forward. And I don't think that would have happened without God, like her faith.
Right.
And so obviously she like holds everything together. You guys get married, and then our parents started a store in Florida. So they were kind of going in and out. And then Yudi, she was like in her last year of high school. So it was really just me and her at the time. But that was when like it felt like everything was taken away, but like it was necessary, very necessary.
Mm.
Because when I look at us now,
Mm-hmm.
like when I think about what we went through when things weren't crazy, I don't know what we like this pandemic right now. I feel like our family wouldn't be okay if it wasn't for that time.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I really believe it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when your family was going through that, my family basically went through something very similar, I think like maybe 4 years prior.
Mm-hmm.
So as Shirley was going through these stages of like, oh, my family's like comfortable, like financial stability is going away, and like all the things that she went through, like it was interesting for me because like, oh, like those are the same exact stages that I went through. And I completely agree with your statement of like, you don't know how we would be in this pandemic now because like when financial stability for my family was kind of ripped away, that was when like my family, they decided, okay, we can't rely on money. Let's rely on God. And so like ever since then, like the perspective shift from like, I got to have all the nice things or I got to have all this financial stability or, I need to show my wealth off to people. When that perspective shifted to from that to like, let's just try to be happy. Let's try to be comfortable. Let's try to be like healthy and let's like develop our relationships. Like when that perspective attitude shift happened, like there was a world of a difference from my parents too. Like my dad was way less stressed. My mom was way less stressed as well because my mom was a stay-at-home mom. But even then, like finances really affected her, right? Because when you rely on money, um, your mood goes up and down with the amount of money that you have.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think just context. When you say like it was like your parents' like financial decisions, I'm sure that that was part of it, but I think most of it was just the economy. Like a lot of immigrant Asian American families, especially because Asian Americans own so many small businesses. When the recession hit in '08, like the small businesses were first to go, and I don't think people really realize that it had a reverberating effect on like years down the line too, because there's like domino effect, right? When small business, so because your dad is a wholesaler, so when all the small businesses that bought from your dad started failing, like it probably had an impact on his business, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's this is I don't think this is a unique experience to us. A lot of people went through this, and I think the response, like how our families turned out, I think is like the best case scenario, right? Being able to turn your perspective away from like finances to just trying to be happy. And I agree. Like when I see you guys together, it's like you guys are really close for a family where, the two oldest children are like married and, you guys have like your own lives and things like that. But like even today, like we're all hanging out together. Your mom's in town. So we're eating dinner together before this. And yeah, I don't think that happens quite often unless you kind of go through those hardships together and then kind of persevere through it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because during that time, like it made me realize, even looking back at it now, like God, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps. It's just like you can't time it perfectly. Like I don't. It's not a coincidence that she happened to go and meet you at the time, right before, and that you went through it right before.
Mm.
So like you could be the rock for her to be the rock for us, and like no, like I mean, shout out to all my friends that are still my friends now, and my what I was going through at the time, but like it made me look at myself and go, dude, like the things you think are important are not.
Mm.
And it's like if you were to talk to me then and say, oh, when you're 30 you'd be in this situation you're in now, um just on paper I would say, okay, yeah, I'm not surprised. But like the path to get here, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, so essentially what happens from then, sorry, I'm kind of sidetracking too much.
No,
Like,
no.
um, yeah, I mean, obviously you and Shirley are doing your thing, and Yudi now is going to college and really showing me like how much she's getting into her faith. And right at the time, like Hannah, my wife now,
Mm-hmm.
uh, she had just literally had popped in to my life, right? I had just gotten out of a previous relationship, and like it was the first time where I was friends with someone before I became romantically involved.
Oh.
Like even now, I don't think guys and girls can truly be friends
Yeah.
like separately unless your parents are like, you know, kind of put you in a place. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, maybe I'm old school in this way, but like, I don't know. I mean, um, I it was like Hannah and I just had fun together,
Mm-hmm.
and it was when I was like, wow, like this is someone I can just hang out with, and it's not like I have to sacrifice my interests to spend time with this person.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I think because of our foundation like that, like I'm not saying our marriage is like super easy, but I would say it's like amazing. Um, just because like we went through like all the like I think everything hard you have to get through to build communication with one another, we did. So at the time, our family split up. We get rid of the house. So Hannah and I moved to Miami. Right, we're getting married. Our parents want us to get together, and so in Miami, we're like in a 600 square foot studio with
Mm-hmm.
no doors, newlywed, no family, no friends. Um, so like just even that is hard, but being in an area without anyone else to like run to made us have to just figure it out.
Yeah. And like you can't really fight and then not talk to each other because you're essentially in one room together.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it's like if you don't fix it, then it's just like it's never gonna end, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think for us, we realized like, oh, like love is a decision, and it's
Mm.
not a feeling or choice. And I think like what's interesting though is when even when we're in Miami now, like Hannah's still like a believer, and this is like when I'm like in a dark place. Like I'm resentful, I'm angry. I'm just like I'm glad we got out of there, and we're in Miami, and let's just like live it up, and you know, and I realized then it's like I'm constantly seeking other things to fill or kind of distract me from pain, all that pain I had,
Yeah.
which led me to make a lot of my decisions emotionally. So like my finances or whatever, like, you know, it was just a series of decisions looking back now, like, or not wise. um, but then like, I think even that like gave us enough pain to start reassessing, okay, like what is it that we did to get us here and what can we do to get out? So like, essentially what happens is, you know, I'm going to school now in Miami, and
For your MBA.
yeah, for my MBA. I've been with like the small startup. We do like retirement readiness. And so I've been with them for a few years, moved to Miami with the company, and like my boss, shout out to my boss, like he's awesome. And he essentially was like, I was just so entitled. I was like, hey, I've been with you guys long enough. Like, give me this. And he's just like, all right. He's so wise too, in that like he's such a good communicator, and he knows how to balance things well. So he's like, okay, like that's fine, but you know, like why? Right? I was just like, well, if you don't give me what I want, I'm gonna leave Miami, blah blah blah. So he's like, all right, like we'll figure it out. I'm going to school. and I graduate. So like as I'm kind of going through that process, I think he's trusting me more and more because I've become just more, I guess, initiative. And like when I graduate, I'm like, okay, I need more money or I'm going to leave. And it's not like, but even at that time, it wasn't that like we needed more money because I deserved it. It was like, if you want me to stay here and to kind of help me with the bad decisions I made like financially, like I need this, which I didn't tell him at the time, obviously, but like he was really gracious, provided what we needed, and we moved to a nicer part of Miami. And like a few months in, like the pandemic had started, so I kind of skipped all over. I really kind of skipped 3 years of the school, but just to quickly summarize it, it was just a series of bad decisions and me kind of trying to distract myself and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And
So when you say bad decisions, do you mean just like spending wise, or just
all the above, like spending, like, I mean, I made a lot of great friends, but like spending and like just not being wise with time, and like it was more like everything I did. And we made a lot of great friends there too, but for me personally, like on our own time, it was always based around like, well, what can I do to like satisfy this craving or distract myself, I guess. And I think now it's just always like seeking God. But it was more like, well, God abandoned me, so I don't want to go to God. And then like he started going to VU church, and it was like the sermon happened to be about like seasons, and essentially the sermon was essentially like, look, like everything you went through, like even if it's right now, like I promise, like God didn't abandon you, has never abandoned you, and will not abandon you. For some reason it spoke to me. So in that sermon I was like, all right, like maybe I should like reassess my faith and start going back. And it was at that time when things did change for me. So it was like right before I graduated. So like, I think just that change of heart and attitude of mine, it was kind of spreading just in like all my little decisions. And I happened to get promoted, and then we moved to the nicer part. And then essentially the pandemic had just started to come in. So that was like really weird because right before then, right, like I'm essentially trying to make sure we can get through while experiencing the consequences of the decisions that really I wanted to make, not even Hannah. But like it was at that time where she actually was like, man, she's so awesome. She was like, this is what we're going to do. Here are the parameters. And we are going to like, it's going to hurt because we're going to just cut out everything, but we're going to do it. You work and I'm going to figure this out, because she hated like her job at the time. And like her career story is really crazy. Like she doesn't work now, but like, I'm glad she doesn't have to now, because she worked like her whole life. She had like every part-time job, and she like, if she does anything, she sees it to the end.
Oh wow.
So even with like I mean, I say she's the CEO of our home. And like when I get promoted, I say we get promoted, because it's not happening without her. So it's kind of I mean, like, sorry. I feel like I'm kind of jumping all over the place.
That's great.
So yeah, I mean, we essentially, she sets the parameters and we're going through the motions. And like around that time, her mom had given us these little workbooks where we had to fill out proverbs. You just write it out and you read it. So it's like, okay, like, why don't we just do that? She gave it to us. And it was around then where I started looking at like what Proverbs is about. And then it started helping me reflect on like the decisions I made and like my parents with their businesses and like my relationships with like people. And I started realizing like how even the little, like the tiniest things where you're just like petty or like, I don't know, just any decision you kind of just make based on what's easiest or convenient, like has a ripple effect. Like the butterfly effect term, I think is like, it's definitely real in that like every decision you make that's like could be sinful is it definitely has a long-term effect.
Yeah.
Even if it's not right now. So
and I'm sure you realize that because you were kind of living through that, right? The consequences of what you, like your impulses or
right. And well, you know, I don't mean to generalize it, my bad decision making, right? But it was like, if I wanted to like, I would want to buy like nice like clothes, or I wanted to like buy this or buy, you know, random stuff that I would end up selling because it's just like, what am I doing? But I think like Proverbs really taught me that. So like as I'm reading through Proverbs, it's crazy because like our friends now are like, hey, let's go to this music festival. Let's do this. Let's do that. And Hannah and I are like, no, you know, and they're like, oh. So like they would do this thing where they're trying to like talk it up and give us like FOMO. But man, we were just like, no, we can't. Like if we don't do this now, we're just going to end up homeless or something, you know? And then as like we finally started hitting our groove, the pandemic hit. So this is like insane because we're like dedicating our lives to God. We're making right decisions. It's been hard. But like it was the one time where our marriage started getting better because like not only are we working together to progress in our future, like we had to get creative in how we spend our time, right? Like even to the point of like going out to like 7-Eleven to buy an ice cream, like we made that a date. You know what I mean? Like we were intentional with every dollar, every cent. And when the pandemic hit, it was more of a reassurance. And I mean, we still talk about it like randomly now, but we believe like God was like, okay, you're going to choose me. Obviously, you know, we're not saying the pandemic happened on our timing, but more like we had chosen to be wise on God's timing, right? God's timing, which we believe. And it just happened to work out for us.
Right. Yeah, because with the pandemic, your friends aren't going to music festivals and things like that anymore. So they can't like try to like get you guys to come out, things like that. Right?
Yeah. So then what we chose not to do and figured out how to get through it voluntarily, it for us it was like, oh, like we're ready for this. But it was crazy to see because a lot of people around us, they felt like it was taken from them. And that I see it as like a real blessing. But I guess like because we had chosen to like not like work on ourselves before, it only kind of accelerated that process for us, or that at least the pandemic did, because like any room for temptation was now gone. There's nothing that can tempt us. We have to separate. And so like what we did in that time was like I just started like reading a lot. And it was then I realized that like anything is possible. I say that lightly. Like I'm not saying I'm gonna go play in the NBA if I like work hard enough. But like if you really put in time into anything you want, it'll work out. Yeah. So I started kind of feeling that and reassured by God in that sense. So
Yeah, that means a lot coming from a COO. I mean, like the fact that you are in the place that you are in your career, I think really is a testament to what you were just saying, right? Like, put your mind to it, and it'll, yeah, it'll happen. Yeah.
Yeah. I Yeah, I mean, I do believe that that God was just like, look, like here's what you're blessed with. And looking back on it, like even in high school, I was never like the funniest kid. I was never the maybe I was the loudest and the most temperamental, but like I wouldn't say I had one thing I was really good at other than like kind of bringing people together. And a lot of the things I thought were kind of that made me not special are the things that I believe make me special now.
Oh wow.
Right? Like I think like leadership is you have to be very unselfish, even though most people think you have to be selfish to get there.
That's very interesting because people think that in order to get ahead, you have to put yourself first and you have to be cutthroat, right? But what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case in terms of leadership. Or getting to a place of leadership is a self-giving thing, right?
Yes.
Do
oh, go ahead.
So do you feel like that in your position now that being able to be selfless serves you better than like if you were to be selfish?
Yeah. Wow. Like I don't like I will never say anyone works for me. I say I work with people. And I would never say nor would I want like my team or my team members to say like, oh, I work for Brian. Like I want to say I want them to think and feel and believe we work together. Wow. And it's a lot of those things where like I think if you kind of look at just proverbs and wisdom, it's like they're all intertwined. Like, right? So if you want to be selfish and you don't want to cut corners and kind of get ahead, what do you have to do? You have to be patient. And you have to delegate. And you have to... And if anyone reads like self-help books or business books when it comes to career and they talk about high leverage activities, like leverage means power, but where you get the power from is setting up systems to support your people. That's high leverage activity, right? Like they're like, oh, you want to do something to where they have to respect you, but it's like no, like you're training them and putting them in a position to succeed. That is high leverage.
Wow. Oh wow, man. So when do you think people when they see the term high leverage, they just mean you're like dangling something that people want like in front of them?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think even now, right? Like if I was not being authentic, even though it's through a webcam, any of your viewers would notice it like this. Like, oh, what? Like he's not you know what I mean? Yeah. Like so imagine if like people you're working with every day, I mean, they would definitely sense it. Like ulterior motives.
Right.
And that's when I really realized, and I wouldn't have known this without what our family went through, is that like nothing is that important. Like if you need your ego put on a pedestal, like is that really accomplishing any mission? And it's almost like foolish.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if there's people that have ego so big where they would much rather say, oh, I helped my company get $1 million versus someone who's just like humble and is part of $100 million thing. But like there's some people that would choose the former than the latter, which to me is baffling because it's almost like, is your ego that important that you'd give up $999 million? You know what I mean? Or something like that? Like, I guess that to me is interesting about human nature.
Yeah, and I think I will say this. I think there are people who do behave like egotistically, and sometimes it does serve them well. I mean, I've been working for 10 years now, And I do see people when they're like selfish and they're like egotistical, they do see some success. But one thing I realize is it's always short-term success. It's not like lasting success. Like they behave that way and then they get all this traction, but then like at the end, people are fed up with them. Like they know that they're not genuine. They know that they're only in it for themselves, and like the people around them don't want to support them. And then so when that hits like critical mass, like everything that they built up kind of implodes. So like I totally agree with what you're saying. I think people think that when they see that short term success, oh, this is the way I got to keep going. But then I don't think they're really thinking about the long term effects of behaving that way.
100%.
Yeah.
And this is so you know how they say human nature is like gray. I recently believe it's black and white. And I think it's black and white in that, like, if you really, really, really want to, if you're unsure about how to handle at least a relationship, like, go to the basics and really think, what would like Jesus do? You want black and white? That's black and white. I mean, I think that's as black and white as you could get, as it's how you would treat someone.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, you know, like when you get in gray, people tend to use more manipulative tactics to get something in a gray area.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's like a lot of like self-justification, even for like negative actions and things like that, right?
And believe it or not, like giving credit to others and not getting it for yourself, people are always afraid that like they're gonna miss out. But either the person that you give the credit to will help you later, or really, I would say this: if your executives obviously don't know what you were able to do, even if you don't have to outright say it all the time, you probably don't want to be working there either anyway.
Huh. Wow.
Like, unless you're a huge company, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not saying I understand what it's like to be in a huge like bureaucracy, but I really believe human nature is a lot simpler than we think.
Yeah. I guess when you break it down to kind of the basics, like I guess it's easy to be in the gray when you're looking at a very high level macro level, but like I think when you take it down to like maybe even like to like as small as like individual interactions with other people, things like that, then yeah, I think there is a lot. It's clearer to see the black and white in that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, like just hearing your life story, like I'm beginning to understand that some of these negative things that at the time seemed very devastating and detrimental, they actually helped shape your mindset now and has equipped you to go through other hardships and to navigate life.
Yeah. I agree with that. Because at the time, right before our family dispersed, I would say like that's really a lot of uncertainty. We don't even know what our next month will be like, which is kind of like what my career has been like. And Hannah has been very patient and graceful. And it's not like we have like a house right now or anything, but it's just more like we're trying to be flexible to kind of go where God tells us to go.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a huge lesson. That's like the best piece of advice that all of our listeners can take. It's not about what happens to you. It's about what you can learn from it and how you can leverage that in the future. Because anybody else having gone through a lot of the things that you and like your family went through, they could have easily said, you know what, I give up. I'm just gonna like be sad and bitter and like screw my life kind of thing, right? But the fact that you guys, like every single one of like your family members, like they all came out with a positive attitude. And yeah, I can like physically see the difference. Like financially, you guys might not be as well off as you were before, but like I feel and sense so much more happiness, so much more calmness and peace. Like especially your dad. Like I think that's like I see the most change in him. Like just from the before and after. Yeah, it's huge.
It's funny because now that, well, it's full circle because the dad I just described in the beginning, I see now. I think my dad is very, and I would say my dad instilled, or both of our parents. I would say my dad instilled like the risk taking, entrepreneurship, like go getter attitude in me and my siblings. But my mom was the perfect dichotomy in the humanity aspect of it all.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I can totally see that.
Yeah. Like if we only had one or the other, like they balance each other out really well.
Yeah. Well, we're hitting up against an hour right now.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think there's so much in there that people can take and apply to their own lives, and like especially all the insight that you have as a leader of your company. I think even if you're not a COO at your career, or maybe you're not even working, but I think those are all things that you can, like, anyone can apply in just any position in life. So thank you so much for sharing. Before we close out, there is there any last thoughts or any last pieces of advice or anything like that you want to share?
Yes, I will say that I know a lot of the cliche and virtue things, and I'm not saying everyone will be as blessed as I've been or won't have the same path, but like you just have to have faith that things work out if you do the right thing. Even if you think it's impossible or virtually it will never happen, like I guarantee you'll be wrong. Like if you do the right thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for hanging out in this new setup that we have today. Yeah, and guys, if you have any questions or any feedback that you want to give to Brian, please feel free to email me at ihthtpodcast@gmail.com, or on Instagram at I hope they hear this, or find us on YouTube. If you want to see what the new setup looks like and the new video looks like, you can find us there. Guys, thank you so much for listening, and yeah, we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.